I woke up every morning at 6 o'clock. It was a habit I could not break, even though I no longer needed to go anywhere. My husband used to say that the world belonged to people who got up early. I believed him once. Now the mornings only reminded me that I was still here and he was not. The bed felt bigger every year, and the silence in the house was heavier than any blanket. When Thomas died, people came with flowers and food. They said kind things that I no longer remember. After a few weeks, they stopped coming. Everyone has their own life to return to. I was left with his old coat by the door, his slippers under the chair, and a heart that did not understand how to keep beating without him. I filled my days with small rules. Every morning, I walked to the shop at exactly 8. I bought the same bread and milk. I checked the price of things even though I had enough money. It gave me something to do, something to care about. The people in my street changed over the years. The young ones moved away. The old ones passed on. New families came with their loud cars and strange habits. They parked badly, played music late at night, and left their rubbish outside. I told myself I did not care, but I noticed everything. I always did. Some called me difficult. I preferred the word careful. My life had become a long list of quiet routines. Monday was for washing clothes. Tuesday was for cleaning windows. Wednesday was for paying bills. I spoke only to the cashier at the shop and sometimes to the cat that slept near my back gate. I told myself I was fine. People talk too much about happiness. It is not something you find. It is something you stop expecting. Then, one cold morning in November, a moving truck arrived next door. I was standing by the window holding my tea when I saw it. A small family got out of a silver car. The man looked confused. The woman was holding a baby, and 2 little girls ran around shouting. I sighed. New people meant new problems. I told myself to stay away. Still, I watched them from the window. They were clumsy and noisy. The man dropped a box, and one of the girls laughed so loudly that I spilled my tea. They looked so alive. I hated how alive they looked. That night, I could hear their laughter through the wall. It had been years since my house heard laughter. I turned up the television to cover the sound. The next day, I went outside to clean the path. It was something I always did after breakfast. The little girl next door waved at me. She had 2 missing teeth and hair that refused to stay still. I wanted to ignore her, but she waved again. I gave a small nod. That was enough. She smiled like it was the best thing that happened to her all day. I shook my head. Children were strange. Later that week, I saw the woman from next door struggling with a flat tire. I watched from behind my curtain. I told myself it was none of my business, but she looked lost. I remembered Thomas fixing things without being asked. He would have helped her. I felt angry thinking about him again. Still, My hands moved before my mind did. I put on my coat and went outside. She looked surprised when I spoke. She thanked me many times. I said it was nothing. Inside, it did not feel like nothing. After that, she started to greet me every morning. Her name was Sarah. Her husband was called Leo. The girls were Anna and Lily. I learned these names by accident. I did not ask. I told myself I was not interested, but I began to notice when they were gone and when they came back. I noticed the way the girls played in the yard, how they drew with chalk on the ground. I remembered the way Thomas once talked about having children. We never did. Life had other plans. One evening, I found a small drawing pushed under my door. It was a picture of me standing next to a cat. Above it, in large letters, it said, "To our kind neighbor." I smiled before I could stop myself. I told the cat that it was a silly thing to smile at. But I put the drawing on the fridge. Weeks passed, and winter grew harder. The days felt shorter. I tried to ignore the ache in my chest. I missed Thomas more in the cold. I had made a plan month before. It was simple and quiet. I would follow him. I had even written the letters. One to the lawyer, one to the neighbors, one to no one in particular. I thought about it every night, but something always interrupted me. The sound of the children next door. The knock on my door when they brought me soup. The sight of their snowman half falling apart. Little things, like strings that kept me from drifting too far. One afternoon, Sarah came to my door again. She said her husband was in the hospital, nothing serious, but she needed someone to watch the girls for a few hours. My first thought was no. I could not take care of anyone. I had not even managed to take care of myself. But she looked tired, and I could not find the words to refuse. The girls filled the house with noise. They touched everything, asked questions I did not answer, and drew hearts on pieces of paper. I made them tea with too much sugar, and they said it was perfect. When Sarah came back that evening, she hugged me and said I was wonderful. I wanted to tell her I was not wonderful. I was broken, but her words stayed with me long after she left. That night, I looked around my living room. It felt different, warmer. The girls had left their drawings on the table. One showed a house with 2 doors. On one side was their family. On the other was a woman with gray hair, smiling. I had not drawn anything in years, but I took a pen and wrote my name next to hers. I sat down and read one of my old letters, the one that said goodbye. I folded it carefully and put it away in a drawer. For the first time in months, I did not want to finish it. I told myself it could wait a little longer, maybe until spring, maybe longer than that. The next morning, I woke up before the alarm. The house was still quiet, but the silence felt softer. I opened the curtains and saw the girls in the yard, waving at me. I waved back, properly this time. They jumped and shouted my name. My name. After so many days of nobody saying it. I smiled, then I laughed, and it felt strange but right. I walked outside with the cat following me. The ground was covered in frost, and my breath made small clouds in the air. Sarah came out holding a cup of coffee. She thanked me again for helping yesterday. I said she did not need to thank me. She smiled and said, "We're lucky to have you next door." Lucky. The word stayed with me all day. I used to think I was unlucky, cursed even. But maybe luck looked different than I imagined. Maybe it came in small knocks, loud laughter, and messy drawings. Maybe it came in the form of people who arrived when you had already decided to disappear. That night, I sat by the window with my tea. The street was quiet, the lights soft, the world calm. For the first time since Thomas left, I did not feel completely alone. I did not feel healed, but I felt something moving inside me, something alive. I looked at the picture on my fridge and whispered, "Maybe tomorrow I'll bake something for them." Then I laughed softly because Thomas would have said it was about time. Before I continue with the story, please like, subscribe, share, and let me know in the comments where you are listening from. Your support means a lot. Now, let's continue. The next few weeks passed more quickly than I expected. The mornings were still cold, but they no longer felt as empty. Every day I found myself looking out the window, waiting to see the girls running to school or playing in the yard. They waved whenever they saw me, and I began to wave back before I even thought about it. It became part of my morning routine, like making tea or feeding the cat. Sometimes I caught myself thinking about Thomas in a different way. Before, every memory hurt like a cut that never healed. Now they felt softer, like touching an old scar. I started remembering the good things instead of only the end. The smell of his coffee, the way he hummed when fixing something, the way he always held my hand when we crossed the street. I missed him still, but I stopped feeling angry at the world for taking him away. Sarah visited often. She always brought something small with her, like a piece of cake or a magazine she thought I might like. She talked a lot, but I did not mind it anymore. Her words filled the house like music. She told me about her job at the hospital, about her husband who was still recovering, and about the children's never-ending stories. Sometimes she cried a little, and I listened. I did not have advice to give, but I had time, and sometimes that was enough. One afternoon, she invited me to come over for dinner. I said no at first. I had not been to anyone's house in years, but she insisted in her usual kind way. That night I stood in front of my wardrobe, not knowing what to wear. It felt strange to care about such a thing again. I put on a clean sweater and brushed my hair. When I walked into their house, it smelled of garlic and bread. The girls ran to me and pulled my hand toward the table. I told myself I was only staying for an hour, but I ended up spending the whole evening there. After dinner, the girls showed me their room. It was full of toys, clothes, and colors. I watched them laugh and play and realized how much noise can mean life. I used to hate noise. Now, I was afraid of silence. When I went back home, I stood for a long time in the hallway before turning on the lights. My house felt smaller, but not sad, only quiet. I sat on the sofa, still smiling from the laughter that echoed in my ears. From that day, I began to help Sarah more often. Sometimes she needed someone to collect a parcel, sometimes to water the plants, sometimes just to keep an eye on the girls. I told her she should not depend on me, but deep inside I liked being asked. It reminded me that I still had a purpose. One morning, I saw that their fence had broken in the wind. I went to the shed and found some old tools. My hands were slow and stiff, but I managed to fix it. When Sarah came home, she thanked me again and again. I told her it was nothing, but inside I felt proud. It was the first thing I had repaired since Thomas died. In the evenings, I started walking around the neighborhood again. I had stopped doing that after his death. Now I noticed things I had not seen before. The smell of bread from the bakery, the sound of children playing, the old man who always fed the birds near the park. I began to greet people again. Some smiled in surprise, as if they thought I could not smile at all. I liked proving them wrong. Still, there were days when the grief returned without warning. Sometimes I woke up in the night and reached for Thomas's side of the bed. Sometimes I sat in the kitchen and felt tears fall without a clear reason. The difference was that I no longer tried to stop them. I let them come and go, like waves that would always visit but never drown me completely. One afternoon, Sarah told me her husband was going back to work soon. She looked happy but tired. I noticed how she worried about everything, and I saw myself in her. I told her to rest more, and she laughed. Then she asked if I could look after the girls one weekend while she visited her mother. I wanted to say no, but the words did not come out. The truth was that I wanted them around. That weekend, the girls filled the house with color. They watched cartoons and asked endless questions. They drew pictures of everything, even my cat, who hid under the sofa most of the time. At night, they helped me bake cookies. They made a mess in the kitchen, but the smell was wonderful. We ate too many of them, and we laughed until it hurt. When Sarah came back, the girls did not want to leave. They hugged me tightly, and for a moment I felt like I was part of something again. After that weekend, something changed inside me. I started opening my curtains earlier, letting in more light. I cleaned the garden and planted flowers that Thomas once liked. I found his old radio and fixed it. It still worked, even though the sound was soft and crackling. I played it every morning, and it felt like the house was breathing again. One morning, I got a letter from the council. They were planning to cut down the old oak tree at the end of the street. They said it was unsafe. That tree had been there since before I moved in. Thomas loved it. He used to say that old things deserved respect. I walked down to look at it, and I felt something tighten inside me. I decided to write a letter to the council. It was the first time in years that I had written anything for the world outside my house. Sarah read the letter and said it was perfect. She told me I should send it to the local newspaper too. I laughed and said nobody cared what an old woman thought. But she said I was wrong, and for once, I wanted to believe her. 2 weeks later, the newspaper called and asked to print it. They even used my name. When I saw it in print, I felt a strange pride. For years I thought my life was finished, but there it was, my name in ink, my voice still alive. Soon, people in the neighborhood began to talk about saving the tree. Some even came to thank me. The girls said I was a hero. I laughed and told them heroes were young people, but they said heroes could be anyone who cared. I liked that idea. That small fight for the tree gave me new energy. I started to talk to my neighbors more. I shared stories about the past, about Thomas, about how the street used to be. People listened with interest, and I realized how much I had seen, how much I had to tell. For the first time, I saw myself not as someone at the end of life, but as someone still in it. Spring arrived quietly. The flowers in my garden began to grow. The cat spent more time outside. I often sat on the porch, watching the children play, feeling the sun on my face. One day, I heard a knock at my door. It was a man from the council. He said they had decided to keep the tree. He smiled and said my letter had made a difference. When he left, I stood for a long time by the window, looking at that old oak and thinking about Thomas. He would have been proud. That evening, Sarah invited me again for dinner. I brought a small cake I had baked myself. The girls clapped when I arrived, and Leo thanked me for helping his family. They talked about plans for the summer and invited me to join them for a picnic. I said I would think about it, but I already knew I would go. That night, when I went back home, I sat by the window again. The streetlights glowed softly, and the wind moved gently through the branches of the oak tree. I thought about the letters I had once written, the ones that said goodbye. They were still in the drawer, but I no longer wanted to open them. I realized that something had changed forever. I still missed Thomas every day. That would never end. But now I also missed the girls when they were not around. I missed Sarah's voice and the sound of life from next door. I missed things that were still part of the world, not things that had already gone. It felt like a quiet kind of hope. Not loud or bright, but steady and true. Before going to bed, I looked at the mirror. My face had more lines than I remembered, but there was color in my cheeks. I whispered goodnight to Thomas, then to the cat, and finally to myself. For the first time in years, I slept without tears. The summer came early that year. The days grew long, and the smell of cut grass filled the street. Children played outside until late, their laughter floating through the open windows. I began to spend more time in the garden. The flowers I planted in the spring were taller now, and the bees moved lazily between them. Every morning I took my tea outside and sat by the little wooden table that Thomas built. I looked at the oak tree at the end of the road and felt calm. Sarah often joined me for tea before going to work. She said my garden reminded her of her grandmother's house. We talked about simple things. Sometimes we sat in silence, watching the light move through the leaves. It was a comfortable silence, one that did not need to be filled. The girls visited almost every day. They brought drawings, cookies, or stories from school. They called me Miss Nora, and sometimes Grandma Nora when they forgot. I never corrected them. The name felt warm in my ears. I had learned to keep my heart open again, but I still carried my grief quietly. Some nights, I sat by the window and looked at the stars. I imagined Thomas somewhere among them. I spoke softly to him in my mind, telling him about my day, about the family next door, about how the garden was finally blooming again. I hoped he could hear me. I hoped he was smiling. In July, Sarah's family went on holiday for 2 weeks. Before they left, she asked me to water her plants and feed their fish. The house felt too quiet without their noise, but I looked after everything carefully. One evening, while I was watering her garden, I saw a boy from down the street trying to climb the oak tree. I told him gently that it was not safe. He nodded and ran away. I looked up at the tree and smiled. It was still standing strong. So was I. A few days later, something unexpected happened. I woke early to a strange sound, like a soft cry. I went outside and saw a small cat lying near the fence. It was thin and shaking. I brought it inside and gave it water and a little milk. My old cat, Rosie, watched from a distance with suspicion, but she did not protest. I decided to keep the new cat for the night.